So thus far in class, we have been learning all about regular tense verbs, right? Regular present tense verbs. We have been learning about AR, ER, and IR verbs. Now we are going to take a little bit of a leap forward and learn about the second category of verbs that was presented to us at the beginning of the term, and that is irregular first-person singular verbs. That is to say, verbs that are irregular in their yo form. The good thing with the categories of verbs is that it tells us where the verb is literally irregular. That is to say, if I am in the second category of verbs, I know that the verb is always going to be irregular only in the first person singular, because where it is irregular is in the name of the category. So in this, we can always know that we will only be irregular in the first person singular, or only in the yo form. Now, what do I mean when I say irregular in the first person singular? Well, what I am saying is that the root of the verb is slightly irregular. Because you may remember, as we've been doing regular present tense verbs, we just copy the root as it is over into our box, and then we put the appropriate ending on the end of it. Well, that's not how it works with irregular first person singular verbs exactly, because they are mildly irregular, but only in the first person singular. So let's look at an example. For example, with the verb hacer, here we see in the first person singular that the root has changed to include a G, right? Literally, if we conjugated it in a regular form, right, it would be yo asco. But that's not what we say. So in the irregular first person, the root changes to include a G, and yet the ending remains the same. So, and notice that all of the rest of the verb is conjugated as if it was regular. So this is conjugated regularly. It has the same root as the root of the verb, and it all follows a regular pattern. I want you to notice one other thing about it, and that is that the endings have all stayed the same. These are all the same present tense endings that we have just been learning in class. They are the same ones that we would use for any regular ER verb, or if there's other verbs like AR or IR, it is the same regular ending. And that is because the ending tells us who the speaker is and where we are in time. So the ending will not change. So these are all just going to stay the same regular present tense endings as before. The only difference is that in the first person singular, the root will change. Now, you can find this in your book on page 98, and there you will find a list of irregular first person singular verbs. Among them, you will find conocer and saber. Do you remember when we talked about the formal and the informal, and then we learned some instances where in Spanish there are two things where there's only one in English? There are many, many examples of this in Spanish. In Spanish too, for example, you will learn that there are two ways to talk about the past, two ways to say the word for, there are two ways to say the verb to be, there are also two ways to say the verb to know in Spanish, and they are both first person singular irregular verbs. So they are both in this category. So how do we tell what the difference between the two of them is? That is to say, when we use one and when we use another. Well, for their conjugations, you can look in your book on page 98. But I've listed them here just in the infinitive. Situations in which you would use conocer in the sense of to know. You would use it when you are familiar with people, places, or things. That is to say, if I want to say, I know Señora Sanchez, then I would use conocer as the verb. If I want to say, I know London, as is to say I've lived there, then I would say, I conocer. If I want to say, I know something as in I have experienced it or I have lived with it, then I would also use conocer. Situations in which I would use saber are for talents, like if I have an amazing voice, which I choose to share with the world, something like that. I know how to sing. Abilities, something that you learn. I am bilingual, or I know several languages. Information, like textbook information, or how to get to the library. Those are informational things. And facts, that is to say things that cannot be altered. So in 1492 Christopher Columbus came to the United States. Those kinds of things would be used in the context of saber. All right, now that we have learned how to conjugate irregular yo form verbs, what I would like for you to do is on a 3x5 note card, on the front, I would like for you to take one of your irregular yo verbs, which can be found on page 98 of your textbook, and I would like for you to conjugate it on the front of a note card just for practice. On the back of that same note card, I would like you to use the verb that you conjugated in the front in 2 different forms, one of which is the yo form, and then you can pick another form from any of the other 5. I'd just like for you to see in a little bit of a context how they are used differently and to kind of apply what it is that we've learned. So when you get to class, just put it on the corkboard and I'll check it whenever I have time. And as always, be prepared to share it in case I decide to call on you. Thank you, and I'll see you in class.